It's Sunday, November 2nd, and we've got a couple of systems to watch in the Western Pacific. Over the next couple of days, we've got newly formed tropical storm Kalmaegi sitting in the Philippine Sea. The system is forecast to continue intensifying as it tracks towards the west and make landfall in the central Philippines late on Monday night or early on Tuesday morning local time. Thereafter, it will enter the South China Sea, where we could see some re-intensification take place as it tracks west towards Vietnam. And behind it, we've got a new Invest 99W. We talked about this disturbance at the end of the video a couple of days ago, and how this system's future with Kalmaegi was closely tied to the short-term trends that we saw with this system. So there has been some changes in the forecast, though we're really not going to talk about this all too much today, especially in comparison to Kalmaegi further west, as any impacts this brings to the Philippines, if it even does, is a long way out. We're talking 7-8 days plus, and naturally there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. So the general forecast for this system is gradual development as it gradually tracks towards the northwest over the open ocean for the next several days. And we might briefly mention it, but again, not really talking about this one in too much detail. Our primary focus for the next several days will be on Kalmaegi, as the system is now formed in the Philippine Sea. And when I made my video on this a couple of days ago, it used to be Invest 98W, now is named Kalmaegi, and we talked about two distinct scenarios that we had for this system. The first one, which was more likely, was that this system would find itself in a low shear environment this weekend and likely intensify into a tropical storm and maybe start intensifying into a typhoon from there on out. The other scenario was the system did not really intensify or develop all too much this weekend and really just hung out here for a while and began to interact more intimately with 99W. We can clearly tell today that that second scenario is now off the table. That door is now closed, as the system is now a formed tropical storm and likely intensifying and could near typhoon intensity as early as this afternoon. And we can really see this if we look at the convective pattern that we have as the sun rises. You'll see that we have this band of convection to the north of the center, and this is taking on the classic curved band look with some convection wrapping around into the center of the storm. And if we take a look at microwave imagery, which gives us a look at what's happening beneath the clouds, we can see a very similar configuration with this outer band wrapping into the inner core like so. And this is so favorable because this helps to close off an eye and eye wall structure, which can, once that's complete, allow a quicker to more rapid pace of strengthening to occur. And throughout the morning hours into this afternoon, the system will likely to continue forming this inner core structure. Vertical shear is not really all too high at all. It's in low values within a range of 5 to 10 knots. And you can see that very clearly on this water vapor imagery, with upper low cirrus clouds expanding away from the storm in all directions, not being held back any by vertical shear. Now, as we go throughout the night tonight into Monday, shear should begin to increase as this nears the Philippines. And if we look at the GFS 200 millibar flow, we'll see why. And if you look here, again, here's Kalmaegi by this point. This is by Monday morning local time. And we've got this area of high pressure directly north of the system. And it being on the southern side of this is going to be dealing with some northeasterly shear in the mid to upper part of the troposphere. And we can see this best if we look here at the sounding from the GFS. Pay attention primarily to this part of the graph, which is showing you the wind speed and direction with height. And what you'll see is that near the surface, we don't really have all too strong flow, and we also have some very light northerly flow very close to the surface. But aloft with that high pressure system, we've got more easterly winds in the 15 to 20 knot range, and that's making for some moderate vertical shear throughout the troposphere. And one big question mark still going forward is, how does a storm react when this shear begins to impact the system? By this point in this forecast, which is out to 12Z on Sunday, so that would be about Sunday evening local time, that's when the shear is going to start increasing to those moderate values of likely 10 to 15 knots. And exactly how, again, the system reacts to that once it starts is going to tell all for how the system is going to go in intensification up to landfall in the Philippines. Now, one thing that does go in its favor is it does seem the shear forecast has decreased in magnitude a little bit over the past few days. This is a GFS again showing you the upper low wind plot. And what you'll see right now is that as the system is approaching the Philippines, we have these northeasterly winds coming in from the backside of this ridge, but it's not all too strong. There's a lot of white coloring directly in the face of the storm. So the shear is moderate, sure, but it's not to an inhibitive level quite that much. But if we go back a few runs, you'll see that a few runs ago, we had more blue colors here, showing a bit stronger northeasterly flow that was in prior runs coming into the backside of the storm. And if we look at the sounding trend from the GFS, so primarily focus on the shear here, how it changes, it starts at 22 knots and ends at 16 knots for the current run. And it is, again, still moderate shear, but 16 knots is much more manageable than 22 knots. And so this may allow the system an opportunity, especially with the inner core structure that it's building today, to be more resilient against this shear and intensify even in the face of the moderate vertical shear. And you'll see in this thumbnail that as that shear decreases, the pressure number does also tend to be lower on these GFS runs, showing that it's likely more resilient to the impacts of this moderate shear compared to if it was, say, in the 20 to 25 knot range, like we saw in the previous cycles. And so this is likely the reason why we're seeing some models today tick up a lot in the intensity. One of the most prominent ones has been the Google DeepMind ensemble, which is an AI model developed by Google. And this has proved itself to be pretty good this hurricane season. Just last week with Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean, it did very good forecasting that system. And back in September, it did very well forecasting Super Typhoon Regasa further north with pretty good confidence, even in long range. So there might be a reason to see what the the Google AI model is saying here with this kind of intensification trend that we see going into the Philippines. Now, the mean here has it, if you're going for a Saffir-Simpson scale equivalent, going to category 4 on the mean. I am still a little bit skeptical on if it's going to get that strong. It does have 2 days still just about over water, but I think we really need to see how it behaves once the shear starts increasing, especially to more increased values around 15 knots. If the storm is still maintaining itself in 15 knot shear, then certainly we could see these kind of scenarios of intensity become more of a reality. But for now, I would say more so lower end of this range, which is say a category 2. Well, it's still nothing to take lightly. That is a strong typhoon potentially coming into the Philippines, and that's the current forecast from Pagasa. You can see here from their forecast, I believe yesterday, and you can see becoming a typhoon by Monday morning. It may be earlier than that, maybe as early as this afternoon, and then intensifying to a category 2 equivalent on their forecast out to landfall in the central Philippines. And it may be higher than this. One aspect is that if it does become a typhoon earlier today, that may mean a higher intensity by landfall. But again, that does depend solely on how does the storm react to the wind shear once it increases. But you can't see the timing here. Looking at Tuesday morning or late Monday night when the system comes into landfall there, and that's the current expectation for most model guidance. The timing issues that we talked about as well a couple of days ago have been worked out between the GFS and the European. Now, that's not the end of the forecast for the system, as it will be continuing to track west throughout the Philippines. We'll likely see a phase of weakening as it interacts with the high terrain and the land here in the central Philippines. And then it'll be moving into the South China Sea, where it will likely recuperate itself and likely re-intensify on its way west towards Vietnam. If we look again at the GFS upper level flow plot, you'll see that by the time the system moves into the South China Sea, we still have a fairly favorable environment. Now, there's likely going to be still some moderate shear in place. If we get a sounding here from the GFS, you'll see that we have this light flow at the surface and stronger flow in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And even though this mean deep layer shear value is less than 10 knots, this is probably still going to lead to moderate vertical shear impacting the system directly. And, that still could put some pressure on the storm. But the general consensus is that the moderate shear is forecast to be at a stage where it's more manageable by the storm still in the South China Sea. So regardless of that, we still see this intensification occur on these model forecasts from the GFS and the European as well. If we look at the European, you'll see it also has what could be a strong typhoon coming into Vietnam here by mid to late week. And we also see this happen if we look at the Google DeepMind ensemble. You can see again that weakening trend take place because of the land interaction with the Philippines, but then we see re-intensification take place in the South China Sea up to landfall in Vietnam. There is a little bit more of a track spread here. The Google DeepMind is much more here into Vietnam, so is the European, but you can see the GFS is a little bit more north there, taking this very close to southern Hainan. So really the cone of uncertainty of sorts would be more like this. So for southern Hainan and eastern Vietnam, we absolutely should be watching this as it tracks west for the next few days, as again, we could be seeing something intensify, perhaps to a significant degree in the South China Sea as the environment looks to remain favorable for that to occur. Now, right now, the current forecast from Pagasa remains a typhoon into the South China Sea, and they do show re-intensification occurring here by the end of the forecast. And this is very similar to the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast, which their forecast is a little bit more updated, so that goes further west in time, and they show the Joint Typhoon Warning Center more significant intensification occurring, like we're seeing on potential here from models like Google, GFS, and the European. So we'll have to watch that closely for the next few days, first for the Philippines and then for Vietnam and southern Hainan, and I'll have more videos on the system as it continues tracking west. Now, what I want to briefly talk about before I leave the video off is the other system behind it. A keen eye would see that the GFS does rapidly intensify a strong typhoon in the open tropical Pacific next week. Now, I put some caution into watching that happen on the GFS model because we're likely seeing the GFS be a little aggressive on that. And the reason I say that is that if we look at how the system's nature is by the time it's slowly developing south of Guam, one thing you'll notice is that this area of low pressure is fairly broad. And one thing about these broad areas of low pressure is that even in light shear environments, they tend to take their time to develop. And the environment is generally going to be favorable by early week. Now, initially, we have this trough dug in east of Guam, so that's going to keep the system suppressed for now. But once this does degrade away, we see a light shear environment take place. And that allows the GFS to go through its convective bias and form the system very quickly. I think right now the European has a much better handle on this, showing a more gradual development take place of this, and you'll see it gradually form for the next several days as it tracks generally northwest into the tropical Pacific. And that's the most likely scenario here that we'll see. But for short-term impact, we could see across this entire Mariana Island chain some scattered showers and storms come through, which could have some gusty winds, but we're not looking at anything too significant right now, not anything like a typhoon coming through those islands. And speaking briefly of the long-term forecast of this, it's very uncertain, as you can see by this point in the model forecast. We're out to 7 days, and taking a look at some of the steering features up north, you can see we have this area of high pressure over Japan, and there's also this long frontal boundary draped across the North Pacific, and models are split onto exactly if this storm is going to recurve east, maybe go between this weakness between this ridge and this ridge. That would be a scenario where we get the system to take a track out to sea and really avoid all land impacts apart from the Mariana Islands here. But another scenario that we've seen models take is that the storm gets trapped underneath of this ridge and begins to track towards the west, and we see some impacts long-term in the Philippines. And that's just a factor of time. You'll see that by the time it impacts the Philippines on this forecast, we're out to getting towards mid-November. This is almost 10 days out on this forecast. So we've got a lot of time to watch that system just in case. I can probably get here if we go in time. There's Google DeepMind. Yeah, we can see it here. All these dots are showing you 99W out to about 7 days, and you can see there's a lot of spread on this. And this is actually a bit quick compared to what we just saw on the European. I think the Google DeepMind might be a little bit too quick on this forecast right now, and because these are a little bit stronger, maybe it would be more inclined to go faster and further towards the west. But, it's still a large spread on this forecast. So we have a lot of time to watch the system. And if this does become more of a significant possibility, that being a storm impacting the Philippines out of this, we'll talk about that when we get there. But for now, long-range forecast, lots of uncertainty, not really worth speculating on that system all too much right now. And I'll have more videos on that system as well, periodically as we go throughout the next several days. That's all that I've got for both of these systems. We'll continue to track Kalmaegi. I almost forgot the name of this system in the Philippine Sea. And I'll again have more videos on this system in the next few days. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.